The alien warlord banished his defective clone to Earth and lost his composure when he encountered him again. Supreme Commander Kavrin stood in the cloning chamber, watching his newest creation fail its fourth cognitive assessment in a row. The clone was physically perfect, identical to Kavrin down to the microscopic level, every muscle fiber precisely replicated, every neural pathway mapped and recreated, except for one catastrophic flaw. It felt things. The Valorian Empire had perfected cloning 3 centuries ago. The process was elegant, efficient, and utterly reliable. You grew a copy, imprinted it with your memories and tactical knowledge, and deployed it to command fleets in multiple sectors simultaneously. The clones were meant to be extensions of yourself, perfect tactical minds unburdened by the weaknesses that plagued natural-born Valorians: fear, hesitation, mercy. The clones standing before Kavrin exhibited all 3. Dr. Sethis approached with his data slate, his facial ridges furrowed in what passed for confusion among his species. The neurological scans are identical to your baseline, Commander. There is no structural explanation for the emotional variance. Every suppression protocol was implemented correctly. The clone, designated Unit 7, looked up at the mention of his designation. Kavrin saw something in those eyes, his own eyes, that made his secondary heart skip. Uncertainty. How long has it been exhibiting symptoms? Kavrin asked. Since consciousness initialization, Unit 7 shows consistent empathic responses to simulated combat scenarios. When presented with civilian casualty projections, he hesitates. When analyzing enemy fleet compositions, he considers their crew as individuals rather than strategic assets. Sethis paused. He asked me yesterday if Valorian soldiers had families. The silence in the chamber was absolute. The question itself was heresy. Valorian military doctrine had evolved beyond such primitive considerations. Efficiency demanded it. The Empire spanned 47 star systems because commanders made decisions unencumbered by sentiment. Kavrin had personally ordered the orbital bombardment of 6 planets. He had never asked if the defenders had families. He had calculated acceptable losses and proceeded. "Can it be corrected?" Kavrin asked. "We have attempted recalibration 4 times. The emotional centers continue to regenerate. It is as if his neural tissue is rejecting the suppression protocols at a cellular level." Sethis looked at Unit 7 with something approaching fascination. "I have never seen anything like it. The clone is functionally useless for military purposes, but scientifically, he is extraordinary. Terminate it." Kavrin turned away. "Begin Unit 8 with modified parameters." "Commander," Sethis said carefully, "the cloning commission will require documentation. 4 terminated units in 2 years raises questions about your genetic viability for replication. Another failure will trigger a formal review." Kavrin's jaw ridges tightened. The Empire measured worth in results. A warlord who could not produce functional clones was a warlord who had reached the limits of his usefulness. There were younger commanders waiting for his position, their genetic material still pristine, untainted by whatever defect kept producing these broken copies. "Then do not terminate it," Kavrin said slowly. "Exile it. There are human colonies accepting displaced beings. They have primitive emotional frameworks. Perhaps it will find its purpose among them. This way, there is no termination record, no documentation of failure. You want to send a clone of yourself containing all your tactical knowledge and command codes to human space." Sethis sounded incredulous. "The clone has no loyalty to the Empire. It could share strategic information. It cannot." Kavrin gestured to the neural interface array. "The moment it leaves Valorian space, the security protocols will activate. All military data will be encrypted beyond its access. It will retain personal memories, basic knowledge, but nothing that could compromise security. It will simply be a defective Valorian with an identity crisis." "And if it talks about being your clone," Sethis asked, "who would believe it?" Kavrin looked at Unit 7 directly for the first time. Humans have difficulty distinguishing individual Valorians. They certainly will not believe that a warlord known for destroying entire civilizations created a broken copy that cries during tactical simulations. Unit 7, who had been silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "I do not cry during simulations. I simply calculate the cost differently than you do." The way he said it with quiet dignity rather than defiance, made Kavrin turn away. This was why the clone had to go. That statement, that fundamental difference in how they processed the same information, was a mirror Kavrin did not want to look into. 2 weeks later, Unit 7 stood in a transport vessel approaching Earth. The security wipe had been thorough and disorienting. He remembered being Kavrin, remembered commanding fleets, but the tactical details dissolved like morning fog when he reached for them. What remained was stranger. He remembered a childhood he had never lived, remembered training exercises he had never physically performed. He was a ghost of someone else's life, given form but not purpose. The transport pilot, a Bravian merchant named Tolk, had asked few questions when offered triple the standard rate. He talked constantly, filling the silence with observations about human space, trade routes, and the peculiarities of Earth customs. "You ever been to Earth?" Tolk asked. Unit 7, who had started thinking of himself as Kess because the designation felt too clinical, shook his head. "I have been nowhere. This is my first time leaving Valorian space. You are running from something, not a question, a statement." Kess considered lying, then decided he lacked the energy. "I am running from being someone I cannot be." Tolk laughed, his 3 lungs producing a whistling sound. "You will fit right in with humans then. Half of them spend their lives doing exactly that." Earth Station Terminus was chaos. Kess had never experienced anything like it. Valorian stations were ordered, efficient, every species segregated into designated sectors. Here, humans mingled with dozens of alien species in a marketplace that seemed to operate on enthusiasm rather than logic. Vendors shouted in multiple languages. Children, human and otherwise, darted between stalls. Somewhere, someone was cooking food that smelled simultaneously appealing and concerning. A human woman approached him within minutes. She was small by Valorian standards, barely reaching his chest, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that assessed him with uncomfortable accuracy. "You are new here, not a question," she stated it the way Tolk had stated his observation. "Yes," Kess said. "I am looking for work. What can you do? Fight, command, strategize." He paused. "I was told these skills are less valuable in human space." She smiled. "You are Valorian. Military caste, yes? How did you end up here?" "It is complicated. Most good stories are." She extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I am Dr. Maya Chen. I run a medical clinic in the lower sectors. We treat anyone who comes through those doors, regardless of species or ability to pay." Kess took her hand carefully, aware that human bones were fragile. "That sounds inefficient," she laughed. "Welcome to Earth. Inefficiency is our specialty." "Do you have medical training?" "None. Can you lift heavy things, maintain order in a waiting room, and not faint at the sight of blood?" "I am Valorian. We have redundant circulatory systems. The sight of blood is irrelevant. You are hired." Maya started walking, clearly expecting him to follow. "Pays poorly. Hours are terrible. Patients are often ungrateful. But you will earn your keep honestly, and nobody asks too many questions about where you came from." Kess followed her through the crowded station, and for the first time since consciousness initialization, felt something other than inadequacy. It might have been hope. He was not certain. The Valorians had never taught him to recognize it. 3 years passed in the rhythm of human time, which Kess found both slower and more meaningful than Valorian chronology. The Valorians measured time in strategic cycles and conquest intervals. Humans measured it in seasons, birthdays, small celebrations of persistence. Maya's clinic became his entire world. He learned to set broken bones for species he had never encountered. He learned that crying was not weakness, but release. He learned that humans said thank you for the smallest kindnesses and sorry for the smallest mistakes. He also learned that humans asked questions Valorians never did. "Why did you leave your home?" A regular patient named James asked one day while Kess wrapped his sprained wrist. James worked in station maintenance and visited the clinic with reliable frequency, always with minor injuries and major curiosity. "I did not leave. I was sent away." "There is a difference." "What did you do?" "I failed to be what I was created to be." Kess secured the wrap. "You will need to keep this immobilized for 6 days. And you came all the way to Earth because you were not good at your job?" James sounded skeptical. The alternative was termination. Ah, James flexed his fingers experimentally. That does change the calculation. What are you good at? Kess considered the question. By Valorian standards, nothing. By human standards, I'm still determining the metrics. Maya entered the room carrying medical supplies. Kess is good at patience, which is rarer than you would think. He's good at being gentle when strength would be easier. And he makes excellent coffee, which in this clinic is the most valuable skill of all. That cannot possibly be true, Kess said. You've never had my coffee before I arrived. Exactly. Maya's smile was warm. Now I cannot imagine the clinic without it. Small things matter here, Kess. That is the part of human culture you are still learning. The communication arrived on a Thursday, which Kess only knew because Maya had been teaching him Earth calendar systems. The message was coded in Valorian military encryption, brief and absolute. Supreme Commander Kavrin requests your presence aboard the warship Relentless for consultation regarding tactical assessment. Transport has been arranged. Refusal is not advised. Kess stared at the message for 10 full minutes. Maya found him in the supply closet where the communications terminal was kept, his hands shaking in a way she had never seen. What happened? She asked quietly. I have been summoned. By whom? The man I used to be. The warship Relentless hung in orbit like a predator, all angles and weapons, broadcasting dominance through sheer design. Kess had commanded ships like this, or rather, Kavrin had. The memories were there but felt borrowed, like recalling someone else's dream. The shuttle docked with mechanical precision, and Valorian guards escorted him through corridors he knew despite never walking them before. Kavrin waited in the command observation deck, standing before a viewport that showed Earth rotating below. He did not turn when Kess entered. You look well, Kavrin said. Civilian life appears to suit you. Why am I here? Kess asked. Because I need something only you can provide. Kavrin finally turned, and Kess saw himself, the version he might have been if the cloning process had worked correctly. Kavrin's eyes held no uncertainty, no hesitation, only calculation. The Empire is facing a crisis. That is not my concern. I was exiled. You were relocated. Kavrin's jaw ridges tightened. There is a difference. And now, circumstances require your unique perspective. A human colony on Kepler 438c has been taken hostage by Brevian separatists. They have 20,000 civilians and are demanding territorial concessions. Standard protocol would be orbital strike, eliminate the threat and the hostages simultaneously. But you are hesitating, Kess said slowly, because there is something different about this situation. The hostages include the families of 3 human admirals currently commanding joint defense operations in the border systems. Killing them would fracture the human-Valorian alliance. Kavrin pulled up tactical displays. I need a solution that preserves both the hostages and our strategic position. My tactical teams have run 4,000 simulations. Every scenario with acceptable human casualties has unacceptable strategic costs. And you thought of me, the defective clone who calculates cost differently. Kess felt something cold settle in his chest. You want me to solve your problem with the empathy you had removed from your programming. I want you to find the solution I cannot see because I am exactly what I was designed to be. Kavrin's voice carried no irony. You are broken in ways that might be useful. How flattering. There are children on that colony, Kavrin said quietly. I have reviewed the population data. 6,000 are under the age of 10. When I calculate acceptable losses, that number should be strategically irrelevant, but I find myself unable to finalize the strike order. It was the closest thing to vulnerability Kess had ever heard from his original. Your emotional suppression is degrading. It happens, Kavrin said. Age, stress, repeated cloning attempts, the protocols become less effective. I am experiencing something my medical team calls breakthrough empathy syndrome. It is weakening my command effectiveness, so you summon the mistake you threw away because now you understand why I was broken. Kess moved to the tactical display. How long do we have? 36 hours before the separatists start executing hostages. Kavrin stood beside him. I am offering you full access to my tactical resources, temporary command authority, and a solution that saves human lives. What do I gain from this beyond the satisfaction of proving you wrong?" Kavrin was quiet for a long moment. "If you succeed, I will acknowledge you. Publicly. You will no longer be an exile, a failed experiment. You will be Kess, tactical consultant to the Supreme Commander. You will have identity, purpose, legitimacy. And if I fail? Then we both fail." Kavrin gestured to the display. "But I have run every scenario my mind can produce, and they all end in catastrophe. You think differently than I do. That used to be your weakness. Perhaps it is now your strength." Kess studied the tactical display, seeing patterns Kavrin could not because he asked different questions. Where are the children being held? Does it matter strategically? It matters to the solution. Kavrin pulled up the structural data. They are in the central education facility. The separatists chose it deliberately. Any strike on their command center will likely cause structural damage to adjacent buildings. This includes the education facility. And the separatists are Brevian, Kess said thoughtfully. They have a cultural tradition of protecting children even in warfare. It is one of their core values. They would not harm the children intentionally. Correct. But they will not release them either. The children are their leverage. Kess spent 4 hours building a scenario that made every Valorian tactical officer present uncomfortable. It required trust, coordination with human forces, and acceptance of risk that violated standard doctrine. When he presented it to Kavrin, the Supreme Commander listened in silence. "You want to evacuate the adults and leave the children as hostages," Kavrin said finally. "That is your solution. The Brevian separatists will not harm children. It violates every cultural principle they possess. If we extract the strategic hostages, the admirals' families, we remove their primary leverage. They are left holding 6,000 children they are culturally obligated to protect." Kess manipulated the display. "Then we negotiate. Not from a position of weakness, but from a position of shared values. We acknowledge their grievances, offer neutral arbitration, and give them an exit strategy that does not end in their destruction." "You are proposing diplomacy." Kavrin sounded incredulous. "I am proposing a solution where everyone survives." Kess met his original's eyes. "You asked me to think differently. This is what different looks like. It requires believing that the enemy is not inherently evil, that they have reasons for their actions, and that those reasons might be addressed without mass casualties. And if you are wrong about their cultural values, if they harm even one child, then you can proceed with your orbital strike, and you will have lost nothing but time." Kess kept his voice steady. "But I am not wrong. The Brevian Council of Elders would exile any warrior who harmed children. They would lose all internal support. They know this. We know this. The question is whether we trusted enough to build a strategy around it. The operation took 30 hours of careful coordination. Human special forces extracted the adult hostages through a combination of stealth technology and diversionary tactics that Kess designed to minimize confrontation. When the separatists realized what had happened, they were left with 6,000 children and a command structure in chaos. Kess opened communication channels personally. "I am Kess, tactical consultant. I am authorized to negotiate on behalf of the Joint Command. Your strategic leverage has been compromised. However, we recognize that you are bound by honor to protect the children in your care. We propose a discussion of your grievances under neutral arbitration." The silence that followed stretched for 90 seconds. Then, the separatist leader appeared on screen, her facial features showing the exhaustion of someone who had run out of good options. "You removed the adults to force our hand," she said. "Clever. Now we cannot threaten execution without proving ourselves monsters." "We removed the adults because we believe you are not monsters," Kess said carefully. "We believe you have legitimate grievances that have been ignored by colonial administration. We believe those grievances can be addressed through means that do not require anyone to die today. You are Valorian, but you speak like a human." The separatist leader studied him. "Who are you really?" "I am someone who understands the cost of violence," Kess said. The children you are protecting have families. Those families are terrified. Your warriors also have families. Those families are also terrified. We can end this with everyone returning home, or we can end this with orbital strikes and generational trauma. I prefer the first option. 12 hours later, the children were released unharmed. The separatists entered negotiations with human colonial representatives overseen by neutral Confederation observers. It was not a perfect solution. The underlying tensions remained, but everyone survived, which in Kess's calculation made it the best possible outcome. Kavrin summoned him back to the Relentless. The Supreme Commander looked different somehow, as if some internal pressure had released. "You succeeded where I could not," he said without preamble. "The human admirals have conveyed their gratitude. The Brevian Council has acknowledged the honorable resolution, and I have been forced to reconsider 200 years of tactical doctrine." "Does that bother you?" Kess asked. "Profoundly?" Kavrin gestured to the viewport where supply ships were now arriving at the colony. "I spent my life believing that emotion was weakness, that efficiency required the removal of empathy. You have demonstrated that my assumptions were incomplete. I do not know what to do with that information. You could start by acknowledging that I am not defective, that I am simply different. And that difference has value," Kess said. "That would require restructuring my entire worldview." "Good." Kess surprised himself by smiling. "Consider it practice for the breakthrough empathy syndrome you are experiencing. If your emotional suppression is degrading, you will need to learn how to function with feelings. I have 3 years of experience. I could teach you." Kavrin stared at him, and for the first time, Kess saw genuine uncertainty cross his original's face. "You would do that? After I exiled you, called you defective? You are experiencing something you do not understand, and it is compromising your effectiveness. That is a tactical problem I am uniquely qualified to address." Kess moved to stand beside Kavrin. "Also, you are me. If I cannot offer compassion to myself, how can I offer it to anyone else?" The relationship that developed over the following months was strange and undefined. Kavrin could not openly acknowledge Kess as his clone without triggering political complications, but he appointed Kess as a civilian tactical consultant, which gave him access and legitimacy. They met regularly, ostensibly to discuss strategic scenarios, but increasingly to discuss the more complicated terrain of processing emotions after a lifetime of suppression. "I dreamed last night," Kavrin said during one session, his voice carrying confusion. "I do not dream. Dreamless sleep is a sign of proper neural conditioning. What did you dream about?" "The bombing of Tarsus 7. I ordered it 15 years ago, 40,000 casualties, acceptable within strategic parameters, but in the dream, I saw their faces. Individuals, each one with a life I ended." Kavrin's hands tightened on the armrests of his chair. "I woke up unable to breathe. That is called grief," Kess said gently. "You are mourning decisions you made when you could not afford to mourn them. It will not make you weaker, but it will make command more difficult in the short term. How do you function with this? How do you make decisions when you can see the cost so clearly?" "I remind myself that the cost has always been there. I am simply acknowledging it now," Kess said, "and I choose solutions that minimize that cost whenever possible. But when there is no good choice, I accept the weight of the decision rather than pretending it has no weight." Kavrin was quiet for a long time. "I have been offered a governorship, administrative rather than military command, overseeing colonial development, resource allocation, diplomatic relations. The High Command thinks my recent hesitation in tactical scenarios makes me unsuitable for frontline operations. They are not wrong." Kess felt something twist in his chest. "Are you accepting?" "I do not know. I have been a soldier for 200 years. I do not know who I am without war. You are discovering that. That is why this is frightening." Kess stood. "For what it matters, I think you would be an excellent governor. You understand strategy, logistics, and resource management, and now you understand cost in ways you did not before. That makes you better equipped to serve people rather than simply command them. You sound like a human. Maya says that to me frequently." Kess smiled. "I have decided to take it as a compliment." Kavrin accepted the governorship. He relocated to a developing colony in the border regions, taking responsibility for 12 settled worlds and their populations. Kess remained on Earth, working with Maya's clinic and occasionally consulting on tactical scenarios that required his particular perspective. They maintained communication, brief messages that evolved from strategic discussions to something more personal. Kavrin described the challenges of governance, the frustrations of bureaucracy, the unexpected satisfaction of solving problems without casualties. Kess shared stories from the clinic, the small dramas of daily life, the way humans found joy in ordinary moments. 2 years into Kavrin's governorship, a plague struck one of the colony worlds, a viral mutation that affected multiple species with devastating efficiency. Standard quarantine protocols called for orbital isolation, allowing the infection to burn through the population while protecting surrounding systems. Kavrin sent a single message to Kess. "I cannot do this. I cannot watch 80,000 people die because protocol says it is the most efficient solution. Help me find another way." Kess arrived at the colony within 48 hours, bringing Maya and a team of human medical specialists. They worked for 6 weeks straight, synthesizing treatments, coordinating care, pushing the limits of medical knowledge across species barriers. The mortality rate was still devastating, 12,000 dead, but 68,000 survived because someone refused to accept that efficiency required sacrifice. Kavrin met them at the medical center after the crisis passed. He looked exhausted in ways that went beyond physical fatigue. "Thank you," he said simply, "for coming, for helping, for showing me that the alternative to war is not surrender. It is simply caring enough to fight differently." "You are welcome," Kess said. "And for the record, you are not the commander I was cloned from anymore. You are becoming someone new, someone better." "I am becoming defective," Kavrin said with a slight smile. "Like you." "Exactly like me." Kess returned the smile. "Welcome to the family of broken things that work better than they should." Maya, who had been observing the interaction with her characteristic perceptiveness, stepped forward. "Commander Kavrin, I have a question that has bothered me since Kess explained your relationship." "Yes?" "When you created him, when you realized he felt things you could not, did you ever wonder if he was not the defect? If perhaps he was what you were supposed to be all along?" Kavrin looked at her, then at Kess, and something in his expression shifted. "Every day," he admitted. "Every day since I sent him away." The war came 18 months later. The Kreth Dominion, a hostile power from the outer territories, launched a coordinated assault on Valorian border worlds. The attack was brutal, efficient, and utterly unexpected. The Kreth had been silent for decades, building their forces while the Valorian Empire grew complacent in its supremacy. Now they struck with overwhelming force, and the border colonies, including the worlds under Kavrin's governance, were the first targets. Kess was in Maya's clinic when the alert came through. Human and Valorian communication networks lit up with emergency broadcasts. The Kreth fleet had destroyed 3 orbital stations and were deploying ground forces on 4 colony worlds. Casualties were estimated in the hundreds of thousands and climbing. Standard Valorian response time would be 72 hours. The colonies would fall long before help arrived. Kavrin's message appeared on Kess's personal communicator, text only, brief and desperate. "They are slaughtering everyone, civilians, children, everyone. I have 200 security forces against 10,000 Kreth warriors. I need options that do not exist. Kess, I do not know what to do." Kess read the message 3 times. Every instinct, every fragment of tactical training that remained after the security wipe told him the same thing. The colonies were lost. Attempting defense with inadequate forces was not bravery. It was suicide. The mathematically correct choice was evacuation. Save who you could and retreat. Let the Kreth take the territory, regroup and counterattack later with proper forces. That was what Kavrin would have decided before. That was what any Valorian commander would decide now. It was efficient. It was logical. It minimized losses within acceptable parameters, and it meant abandoning 300,000 people to slaughter because their survival was strategically inconvenient. "I am going," Kess said to Maya. "You are going to fly into an active war zone with no military authority and no plan." Maya's voice was calm, but her hands were steady as she began pulling medical supplies. Obviously, I'm coming with you. You cannot. It is too dangerous. Kess felt panic rise. I will not risk you. You do not have a choice. Maya loaded emergency medical kits into transport containers. Those colonies have injured people who need help. That is my purpose. Same as yours. We do not abandon people just because helping them is difficult. The journey to the border colonies took 36 hours using the fastest available transport. Kess spent the time contacting everyone he knew with military experience, tactical knowledge, or sheer stubborn courage. The response surprised him. James from station maintenance, who had served in human colonial defense, a Brevian pilot named Tyrex, who owed Kess a favor from a previous crisis, 3 Valorian soldiers who had been discharged for emotional instability, which meant they could feel fear and chose bravery anyway. By the time they arrived at Kavrin's command center on Meridian Colony, Kess had assembled a force of 47 volunteers. Against 10,000 Kreth warriors, it was laughable. Against nothing, it was everything. Kavrin met them at the landing platform, his expression cycling through shock, relief, and something that might have been hope. You came. You called. Kess grasped Kavrin's forearm in the Valorian gesture of solidarity. Oh, what did you expect? I expected you to be sensible, to recognize that this is unwinnable, to stay safe on Earth. Kavrin's voice cracked slightly. I did not expect you to bring reinforcements that make our hopeless situation slightly less hopeless. Maya stepped forward, medical equipment already in her hands. Where are your wounded? Kavrin pointed to a building that had been converted into a triage center. There are 400 injured. We lost our chief medical officer in the first attack. Our supplies are nearly exhausted. Not anymore, Maya said firmly. Show me what you have. I will make it work. The next 10 days were a nightmare of tactical improvisation. The Kreth fought with overwhelming numbers and brutal efficiency. They were not interested in occupation or negotiation. They wanted extermination and territory in that order. Kess and Kavrin worked together, combining their different approaches to impossible problems. Kavrin provided strategic analysis and resource management. Kess provided unconventional solutions that violated every rule of engagement. They turned civilian buildings into fortified positions using agricultural equipment and improvised explosives. They coordinated guerrilla strikes that exploited the Kreth's assumption of Valorian tactical doctrine. They evacuated children through underground maintenance tunnels that the Kreth did not know existed. They fought for every building, every street, every hour, because every hour meant more evacuees reaching the escape ships. On the 7th day, Kess took shrapnel from a Kreth explosive. Maya patched him up in a storage room that smelled like blood and fear. You're going to get yourself killed, she said, her hands steady despite the tears on her face. And I'm going to be very angry at you if you do. I'm trying to avoid that outcome. Kess managed a weak smile. But if it happens, know that this mattered. Being here, helping them, it gives meaning to everything I was supposed to be and could not be. You are exactly what you were supposed to be. Maya pressed her forehead against his. You just needed time to figure that out. The Valorian fleet arrived on the 10th day, 6 hours before the colonies would have fallen completely. The Kreth withdrew in the face of overwhelming force, retreating to their own territory to consolidate and plan their next assault. Of the 300,000 civilians on the 4 colony worlds, 287,000 survived. It was not a victory. The infrastructure was destroyed. The economy was shattered. People had lost homes, families, lives, but they were alive, and that counted for something. The fleet commander was a decorated warlord named Sethic, who had served with Kavrin before his governorship. She surveyed the devastation with an expression of controlled fury. Your defense should have failed, she said bluntly. You had inadequate forces, insufficient supplies, and no reasonable expectation of reinforcement. By every tactical analysis, you should have evacuated and ceded territory. Why did you not follow protocol? Because protocol would have killed 300,000 people, Kavrin said. I chose differently. With respect, Commander Sethic, I am no longer the soldier I once was. I cannot calculate acceptable losses when I see the faces of those losses. Sethic's gaze moved to Kess, who stood beside Kavrin despite being barely able to stand due to his injuries. "And who are you?" "I am Kess, tactical consultant and apparently someone who makes very poor survival decisions." Kess met her eyes. "I helped coordinate the defense. You are Valorian, but you wear human clothing. You move like a civilian, but you fight like someone with command training." Sethik stepped closer. "There is something familiar about you, about your tactical patterns. They resemble Commander Kavrin's approach, but with an emotional component that no Valorian commander would employ. Who are you, really?" The truth hovered between them, dangerous and inevitable. Kess glanced at Kavrin, who gave a slight nod. Permission or resignation, Kess could not tell. "I am Kavrin's clone. Unit 7, though I prefer Kess now. I was exiled 3 years ago because my emotional conditioning failed. I feel things that Valorians are not supposed to feel. I calculate costs that we are not supposed to count, and I help defend these colonies because I believe every life has value beyond strategic significance." The silence was absolute. Sethik stared at him, then at Kavrin, then back. "You cloned yourself, and the result was defective, so you sent it to human space, and then you called it back to help you fight a war using the very defects that made you reject it in the first place." Her voice was carefully neutral. "That is either brilliant or insane. Possibly both." "It is definitely both," Kavrin said, "and it saved 287,000 lives. Judge me for that if you must, but do not judge him. He came when I called. He fought when retreat was the logical choice. He is everything I was supposed to create and everything I tried to destroy. And he is the reason these people are alive." Sethik was quiet for a long moment. Her tactical mind was clearly processing implications, political ramifications, doctrinal violations. Then she did something unexpected. She saluted Kess with the full honors reserved for superior officers. "Consultant Kess, your service to the Empire and to these colonies is recognized. I will include your contributions in my official report. How you came to be is less important than what you chose to do." 3 months later, Kess stood in a ceremony hall on Meridian Colony, watching Kavrin receive a civilian commendation for extraordinary leadership during crisis. The colony had begun rebuilding. The scars remained, physical and emotional, but people were returning, planting crops, opening businesses, choosing hope over despair. Maya had stayed to help establish a permanent medical center, and she had convinced Kess to stay with her. The clinic on Earth would continue, but this colony needed them more. Kavrin approached after the ceremony, his formal attire looking uncomfortable on someone who had spent decades in military uniforms. "I have been offered reinstatement to military command. Sethik believes my recent experience has given me valuable perspective. They want me to train a new generation of commanders who can balance tactical efficiency with ethical considerations." He paused. I declined. "Why?" "Because I do not want to teach people to be what I was. I want to be what you are." Kavrin smiled slightly. "I am remaining as governor. I'm going to build things instead of destroying them, and I would like your help if you are willing to stay." "I'm staying," Kess said. "Maya convinced me that running away from purpose is pointless when you have finally found it. Also, she threatened to be disappointed in me, which is apparently more terrifying than Kreth warriors." Kavrin laughed, a sound that was becoming more natural with practice. "I understand completely. She is formidable." They stood together overlooking the colony, two versions of the same person who had become different people entirely. The clone who was supposed to be identical, but became himself. The original who was supposed to be perfect, but became human. And between them, an understanding that defects were often just differences waiting to be valued. "You know what is strange," Kess said. "I was created to be you, to extend your consciousness, your tactical mind, your effectiveness, and I failed at that completely. But in failing to be you, I became me. And that turned out to be exactly what was needed. Life is inefficient that way." Kavrin agreed. "The best outcomes rarely follow the plan. They emerge from the spaces between intention and accident. You were my accident, my failure." and my greatest success. Years later, when historians analyzed the Battle of Meridian Colony, they would note the unusual tactics employed. The combination of Valorian strategic doctrine and human emotional intelligence. The refusal to accept acceptable losses. The coalition of unlikely volunteers who chose courage over calculation. They would call it the turning point in how the Empire approached warfare, the moment when efficiency began to account for empathy. But in the moment, standing in the rebuilt colony, watching children play in gardens planted over battlefields, Kess thought only of Maya's words. You are exactly what you are supposed to be. He had been created defective, exiled, forgotten. He had learned to be broken in ways that made him whole. And when his original, the perfect commander who could not feel, finally learned to feel and called for help, Kess had answered. Not because it was efficient, not because it followed protocol, but because it was right. And sometimes that was the only calculation that mattered.